Cool. How's it going, everybody? This is the Conscious Bodybuilding Podcast. Today I have Jess on. Jess is an online coach, and Jess is someone who I found a while back, actually, I think when you were with Revive, but you're someone that I was drawn to for a number of reasons. I think first I saw a lot of your book recommendations, and they were like books that I had already read, and then some others that I actually dove into and thought were really interesting. And then I noticed that a lot of your content was really cool as far as how transparent you were, and a lot of the things that you talked about. So I think that kind of separated you from other coaches, and what initially drew me to you. If you could you give like a brief introduction of yourself to my audience and kind of what has led you to where you are as far as a coach currently?
Yeah, sure. So I have been training for 5 to 6 years now, purely bodybuilding. I hired Steve, I want to say four years ago. Steve from Revive Stronger. Yeah, that's probably important to say. Steve from Revive Stronger 4 years ago. Before that, I was training by myself for a couple of years, evidence-based. I followed RP, I followed 3DMJ, JPS in Australia, and try to educate myself as much as possible. And then I was working shitty jobs, and I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. So I just decided to follow my passion for bodybuilding. I flew to Australia from France, where I'm originally from, and I did an in-person certification and mentorship at JPS, which is an evidence-based facility online program. They do all sorts of qualifications, and I stayed there in Melbourne for about 9 months, just learning, shadowing people in the gym, just educating myself even more on the evidence-based side of things. And then Steve at Revive Stronger offered me an internship. I was an intern for about a year. It went really well, so they offered me a full-time position. So I've been a bodybuilding coach, health and fitness coach for about 3 years now, full-time. And I have been diving into more psychology and the mental health aspect of coaching as well, that for me, comes with it, and it doesn't have to be a separate thing, and it's even I have to acknowledge that both work in combination anyway. So I've been diving into more psychological things. So I'm trying to practice a compassionate and evidence-based approach to my coaching with my clients. But I still coach competitors. I coach Gen Pop clients. I coach like your regular gym goer. So it's quite broad. I teach people, sometimes I coach people and teach people about nutrition and just mental health. So I don't just do coaching for bodybuilding purposes. It's more like, and that's why I've just created my app, and I called it Health and Fitness, because I wanted to have that aspect of health that was important for me just outside of fitness as well, because it encompasses mental health and physical health. Does that answer a question that was very long-winded?
No, absolutely. I mean, a few things. One, I think with a lot of people assume that because like when you first say like, oh, like compassionate coaching, sometimes my brain wants to go to like, well, that's just like Gen Pop. But then if you think about it, like competitors need compassion too. Maybe they don't think that they do. Maybe they think that they're tend to think that they might be a little bit harder and whatnot. But there is definitely compassion that needs to come from a coach, and then also from the competitor to themselves as well. They're not like, competitors definitely have a different psychology, and that has to be treated as such. But that's just one thing that I just thought of as you mentioned that, is how important that is alone is actually being empathetic and like you're going to have a competitor who maybe slips up here and there, and knowing how to navigate that and be empathetic but also hold them accountable, I think is really big. So I like that you mentioned that. And one other thing I wanted to mention, well, were you first, when you first were introduced into like bodybuilding, were you already kind of diving into the evidence-based approach, or did you kind of get some of the misinformation like a lot of people do at the beginning? Like what was your introduction to it?
I was living with American football players back when I was 23, and they were all going to the gym. So I was drawn to the gym through them. So I started training, but I did not want. I was scared of like going into like the weightlifting room. So I started with like Zumba classes, like the
Right.
typical female thing, cardio. Restricting calories. I've done it all, like the binges and restricting cycles, the HIIT classes, the just group classes overall. And then I met my ex when I was 24, and he was into bodybuilding. Typical bro split. So, you know, Monday chest, and you just do like an incline, a decline, a flat bench, and then like all the
Yeah.
flies and all the machines just for chest. So I did that for about a year, grew a fuck ton of muscle because I was a newbie. So, you know,
Right.
whatever works at this point just works. And then I started questioning. I've always had a pretty good sense of critical thinking. So I started questioning him, like, hey, why do we do this that way? And then we split up after a while, and I started to educate myself, and I was looking for the answers that I couldn't find in the kind of bro industry side
Mhm.
of the fitness industry. And yeah, I just discovered Revive Stronger, 3JMJ, RP, started reading books, articles, listening to podcasts, educating myself. So that was really just out of critical thinking and asking myself questions about like, hey, we do this that way, but I wonder if there's something more optimal there, or what's the rationale behind this. So just curiosity.
Yeah. And kind of searching for that why of why do we do things. Yeah, I think that's how it arose for me too, is kind of asking why. Mine was from experiences with coaches and asking why and not getting the answers that I wanted to hear, or not getting any whys really. Being curious as I think one thing is like being curious as to, is there a better way to do things? And that's something that's always kind of guided me, is like, is there a better way? Could I be a better bodybuilder? Could I be better? And I feel like if you stick to some of that bro stuff, if you really want to get better, it's kind of a natural evolution that'll occur where you start asking why, and you start looking for, better. And that's how I think some people find it. Unfortunately, not everybody does, but that's kind of how I found it as well.
Yeah, and I think you could do things both ways. You could literally just be a typical bro and, you know, gear yourself up as much as you can and just get stupidly big and be decently big. But if you want to
Right.
do things for health as well,
Yeah.
you have to pass that, like, I'm just gonna, you know, inject as much as I can, and I'm just gonna, like, you know, lift as much as I can and go to failure every single day, where it's like your body's going to give you some limitations at some point, whether you want it or not.
Right. And that's where I was separated from that crowd, specifically, is because of the psychological aspect of the gear, and the being pushing so hard that you just psychologically break. Some people have a certain resilience to that. And then also asking like, why am I doing this to my health? Is there something that, when you're talking enhanced bodybuilding, is there a better way to do this that's a little bit safer? That's where a really big kind of like questioning arose for myself. But I think that's a great transition, because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about psychology. And as I found you, I think around maybe a year or so in, you had mentioned that you were having trouble getting a proper diagnosis. You had an idea that you might have ADHD, and anxiety and depression. Is that correct? And
Yeah, ADHD, anxiety disorder, clinical depression,
yeah,
all of it.
and you had mentioned you were living in France at the time, and you had trouble getting a proper diagnosis. Could you briefly touch on that experience, and what that was like?
It was a shit show. So in France, adult ADHD is not recognized as a condition. It's not a mental health condition. So kids can be diagnosed for ADHD. For some results, those kids eventually grow into adults, but those adults aren't supposed to have ADHD anymore. That's how the French system works. I don't know why it's that way, but it's that way.
Yeah.
So there's only one clinic in France that do adult ADHD guidance and some sort of diagnosis, but it's not a proper diagnosis. So I had about 3 to 4 different appointments across 6 months during COVID. So that was not fun. And I had to drive 6 hours round trip for each of those appointments. The appointments were like 15 minutes long. And I had no other choice than to go to that clinic because that's the only one in the country that diagnosed adult for ADHD. Yeah. So they pretty much said that I had ADHD and then started me on medication. The medication flared up my anxiety disorder. So then I was diagnosed with a generalized anxiety disorder that put me into pretty much clinical depression because I just didn't know how to navigate any of this. And I had no support whatsoever because it's not like a recognized condition in France. Right. So yeah, it was tricky, complicated. It was a fucking shit show. But I'm doing better now. Not that I manage my ADHD with medication because I still don't have access to the medication that I need. But I'm hoping that as things go on, I get availability through the US system because that's my only hope now.
Yeah. Yeah. Was that you recently moved to the U.S.? Was that part of your deciding factor? Is this accessibility to healthcare or those sort of treatments? Was that something that was on your mind potentially? Not that we have like a amazing healthcare system, but
in terms of mental health, it's definitely up there. It's more helpful than in France, like massively more accessible. Right. Less stigmatized and very much so accessible compared to France. But it wasn't one of the primary decision because I still struggle to have access to my medication because I don't have a permanent visa in the US. So it's a bit tricky right now, but definitely like I have so much to say about the US that I'm not gonna dive into it. But yeah, the mental health side of things is definitely more, it's much better than in France.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I wanted to bring that up is because your transparency about your experience with ADHD, I brought this up to you before, was one of the reasons why I pushed my girlfriend to go see a specialist. And then I ended up getting treated as well. And one, I think your speaking on it helped destigmatize it for myself, but it also helped me recognize that my girlfriend might be struggling with some of these things. I remember having conversations with her about like I'm very rational, and sometimes it's probably not the best for relationships or being empathetic. It's something that I'm learning. A lot of the time people don't want to be met with a rational conversation when they are upset or dealing with something. More so they just want emotional support. But I'm very like, well, like we could do this. This is a strategy we could use here. But then I started to realize that a lot of the support, even if she did implement some of the advice that I provided her with full intention of or benefiting herself, not that I'm an expert or anything, but I was just trying to help any way I could, that it wasn't sustainable. And then I just started realizing like, this is something that's beyond myself or anybody in her circle that can help her. And I kept pushing her to get a diagnosis, and they were able to. She actually had the same or similar diagnosis to you, and she was able to get treated. But then I started realizing that I had a lot of the similar behaviors. I didn't have ADHD, but I have this very cyclical behavior that I recognized, where I would have bouts of extreme productivity, and then almost like it was on like the same days of the week, I would just crash and burn and like get really down on myself, and I would not do anything, and it was just like very cyclical behaviors. There was days where I was prevented from doing just daily functioning tasks due to my anxiety. And maybe that's elevated due to the pharmacology that I implement as a bodybuilder, but it was something that was, I've been dealing with that since high school, and it's very stigmatized, especially for men, to deal with. Like I remember I first started seeing a therapist, and I had mentioned it to my clients, and it was still like, what are you doing? Like, that's not, it was like a really weird thing. But it also stemmed from that, hey, I want to do better. I want to be the best person and bodybuilder I could be. I want to be the best spouse. I want to be the best dog parent, whatever it is. And I noticed that this thing was standing in the way of me potentially doing that, especially when I feel like I've done all, like I remember a distinct, I won't ramble too much, but a distinct conversation I had with my therapist where he was like, you're doing all the things. Like, it was just like, we were going through all the stuff. And he was like, yes, this is like exactly what, and it was more so of like he was just kind of working on smaller things with me. And I was starting to realize like, oh my gosh, like there's something else here. And then eventually I got the diagnosis of severe anxiety and mild depression, and started treating it. And it, before I started this contest prep, and I think in the past, one of the limiting factors for me to complete a contest prep was my anxiety. So yeah, I mean, first, thank you for your transparency there, but I just wanted to say that because of how huge it is for people to be transparent, especially people who have a social media following, people who coach other people. As much as you're comfortable with being about things like that, and, I understand that people want to keep some of their life private, and that's totally respectable. But it's helped me tremendously, and I hope that even me stating that I've done this, I've mentioned it to some of my clients who I've identified might have anxiety, like maybe you should see a specialist. And I think it's really important to do that. Has that been something that was difficult for you to do when speaking about your struggles with?
No, and I think that's why I enjoy doing it. I think it's pretty natural for me to be open about those things. I don't know if it's my nature, if it's just character traits, if it's like just, I don't know what it is, but
Right.
I find myself easily open about those things. And the support that I've gotten and the kind of afterward like reward was people telling me that it helped them getting a diagnosis, it helped them seeing a therapist. And I got my diagnosis for ADHD, and I figured out that I had like an anxiety disorder because of people speaking up as well. And because it's very stigmatized everywhere, the more you speak up about those things, the more people you can reach. And even if you reach just one person, it's life changing. Like, you have anxiety, you know how debilitating it can be. And I
Right.
wish anxiety on no one because it's terrible. And people who don't have anxiety, as dogmatic as I can sound, cannot understand how terrible it can be.
Most definitely.
But and if you have the ability to reach out to people, even like indirectly, I think we all have kind of like a role to play there. And if there's ever a good use of social media for me, I'm done with like all the I want to be famous, I want to be known or whatever. It's like if you can reach out to like a few people and help them, like that makes my day, and I'm happy with that, and I don't need more. But I haven't found it particularly difficult to open about those things,
Right.
to open up about those things.
I think it does take a certain type of person to some degree. I think it also takes being secure with yourself. I think the more secure with myself I've become, the more I've been able to speak out about just anything and just be as transparent as possible. I think it's really important for my brand. I think it's really important for helping people because they can actually relate to you. You seem like a human, as opposed to someone who posts photos of their physique or whatnot. No shame on people who tend who brand and market themselves that way. But obviously that's not something that you are trying to do, or myself. Like, it's more so about how can we reach the most amount of people possible? How can we help more people with our brand? At least that's a part of it to some degree. But
And
yeah, I
you,
think, yeah, go.
sorry, and you reach the right people. You reach the people you want to
Right.
be reaching out to,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is
exactly.
a huge difference with like I'm just going to reach out to like anybody, and then they're not going to buy into you because they're going to realize that you're not a great fit for them, they're not a great fit for you, and you can't
Right.
help anybody. Like, you can't help everybody anyway, so you might as well just reach out to people who are going to who resonate with what you're trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. Filter those people out beforehand, right? And I think being authentic, and if we're speaking about social media and reach, I think if you are not being genuine, you're going to attract those types of people. And if you're trying to monetize that somehow, it's a lot more difficult to monetize that unless you are, again, trying to monetize yourself in a non-authentic way. But if you're trying to build an authentic brand, it does take a lot more time for sure. But you get those kind of people who stick around, who you build better relationships with, the people who are better fit. It's definitely the long game that you have to play, and it's very difficult in social media where you have these people who are blowing up, who, their life's perfect and they have these amazing physiques all the time year round. And whether that's reality or not, that is the type of brand that they build and the type of following they build. Those aren't the kind of people that stick around. Those aren't the kind of people who buy into a brand. Those aren't the kind of people, again, it kind of, I think you should look within and ask what type of person you are and what you want to attract when you're making content and when you're being, open and things like that. But I think that's a big part of it for sure.
It's about your integrity. You have to figure out your integrity and how to stay aligned with your integrity. And that's been a huge difference for me. I'm currently reading The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck, and that has been transformative on like my integrity side of things. I learn more and more how to just be myself and market myself to the right people, the people that I want to work with.
Yeah.
And it's definitely taking more time than like you would if you were just like, displaying your physique and winning shows and whatever. Yeah. But I find it much more easier to fall asleep at night knowing that I am doing the right thing for myself and for the people that work with me. So you're never going to make millions out of it, but I'm okay with it. I'm not looking to be a millionaire. If I can have a sustainable lifestyle and do what I need to do with the amount of money that I'm making, that's all I need.
Yeah, most definitely. What was I going to say on that? Yeah, and I think for myself, I don't know how this maybe relates to you, or if you have something like this. For me, with the integrity thing, is having a set of like principles or having a set of rules that I kind of stick to. Like, hey, these are things that I always want to stay in line with. These are things that I kind of always will follow, and that's always helped me. Is like having these kind of like, hey, I'm never going to try to do this kind of marketing or whatever because it doesn't align with who I am. And I think making sure that those principles align with your integrity, align with who you are, is what allows you to sleep at night. Anytime I've done something where it didn't align, that's when I get that friction. That's when I feel unhappy or whatnot, or have trouble sleeping at night. I don't know how you feel about something like that, but
it's an anxiety trigger for me now. Like,
yeah,
I know if I do something that feels out of alignment with my integrity, with my values, I am massively triggered through anxiety.
Yeah.
And I get anxiety attacks and I get super anxious throughout the day. And, if I have a client that I took on because I desperately needed money, or I really wanted to like cash out on the opportunity really quick, and it's not a great fit, every time I'm going to get an answer for them, a check-in for them, a message from them, I'm going to be anxious. I'm going to be like, I'm going to know that I've done something that's not aligned with myself. And
yeah,
I don't want to do that anymore. And even if I'm struggling financially, I set the limit for myself of like, hey, if this is not a great fit, you will know, and you're not going to take them on because it's too much work. It's too much mental capacity that it's taking from me, and it's never going to be worth it.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to say, because it can be difficult to be, you recently started your own coaching business, and excuse me. And, I did the same a few years back, and luckily at that time I was still waiting tables, so I didn't have to rely on the income. But at the same time, you have this like, I'm just going to take on anybody that comes to, especially when you have very few people coming in. It's like, okay, well, I'll just take on anybody. It'll work out. And then you start to realize your success rate with people like that isn't, always the best. And you start to, for me, I was like, what am I doing wrong? But then I started just realizing after a while, like after I started kind of refining my process and learning even more, I was like, well, like maybe it isn't necessarily something I'm doing wrong. Maybe it wasn't a great fit. It can be the other person too sometimes. As much as I don't like to point there, but you have to make sure that you're taking on people who align with you, and that's a very difficult thing to do. especially when you are trying to make a living, right? So maybe for the up and coming coach, like maybe not fully relying on that income right away, and having another source of income is probably a smart thing to do if you want to do it the correct way. Again, you could probably pay someone to run Facebook ads and get a ton of people coming at your door, but it doesn't necessarily allow you to filter out people who could be great fit. But
and you have to market yourself a way that is aligned with what you are teaching people, educating people on, and the way you are working with people. I know that my social media most of the time display that, and people who reach out to me for coaching, not people I outbound on purpose, but people who actually reach out to me, always are great fits because they follow me for a while, they know what I'm about, they know what I'm up to, and
know who you
that's my
are.
marketing. Yeah,
Right,
and
right.
that authenticity and integrity is my marketing, and this is a way for me to say, like, hey, if you're here for a quick fix, if you're here for someone to just yell at you because you didn't eat your calories, this isn't me, and this is not going to work. And I make a point I have a questionnaire that I send people before the consultation. I have a thorough consultation with them, and then I have an onboarding process that has a very comprehensive coaching manual. Everything is detailed. They hear it from me 3 different times. I do a compassionate coaching. This is a collaboration. This is not like me putting my coaching hat on and telling you what to do. I want you to, walk away from this coaching experience knowing that you don't need another coach probably in your life, unless you're a competitor, which is a different kind of thing.
Right.
Or you want to compete in powerlifting or whatever. But if people come to me, I tell them, however long you stay with me, this is all you need. You will have the tools to actually be okay in the world, and you'll be fine. And that's the goal. Like, I don't want you to jump from coach to coach because you're not finding what you want. Like, the goal is for you to be self-sufficient when you walk out of this coaching experience.
Yeah. And I think one thing I always try to think about is sometimes that with that kind of coach hopping thing, sometimes someone comes to you because they had a bad experience with a coach, and how it's so important that you treat that situation delicately. Like, this could be someone's last experience. This was for me in 2017. It was one of my last, like, I was about to quit bodybuilding because I had a bad experience with a coach. And then I went to a coach who had a more evidence-based approach, and it was just much, much better. And, I am where I am today because of that. And I think about that every time someone comes to me, especially if they've been struggling with certain aspects, psychologically or physically or whatever it may be. It's like, this could be their last shot. And then thinking about the impact that you could have on that person is something that always kind of has me aligned with, like, my values, is like, hey, what? And then one other thing I want to mention is, like, if you've ever met someone who you looked up to, or you thought you knew, like a celebrity or whatever that is, and then you meet them and they're not the way that they present themselves on, like, social media.
Never meet your heroes.
It's the most disappointing thing ever. And that can really, really throw a wrench in a lot of things for people, as it has for myself. So that's another thing, is like, you could be this person on social media, but if you're not that person in real life, like, even if I'm talking to someone at the gym, I always try to be who I am. Right. But, you have that friction if you aren't that, for sure.
And it's so common in the fitness industry because all those big accounts are not run by the people who are actually, like, displayed in this account. Like, just like, you're never going to talk to them really. If they have, like, millions of followers or even hundreds of thousands, the probability that you're talking to them through DMs is very, very low.
Yeah. And then a lot of the time they do have a brand, and sometimes an actual character that they built around that, for various reasons. Right. So I definitely wanted to get into, as we're talking about coaching, I want this to be helpful for coaches, but also clients as well, people who are looking for coaches and things like that. How do you, as a coach, facilitate communication? I want to get into expectations as well, but communication, how important is it to the success of a coach-client relationship, and what needs to be facilitated on either side of that relationship for it to function in regards to communication?
you have to create a safe space for people to share what they're going through, because at some, like, we're humans, one or the other person, whether you're a coach or an athlete, one or the is going to make a mistake. It's inevitable. Like, we're humans, like, we make mistakes, we learn from them. This is just how we live and learn. So it's just creating a safe space, a space safe enough for both to be okay with acknowledging, hey, I made a mistake, and I want to fix it. How can we move forward with that? And really hammering down how open you are and how you are okay with people sharing hard stuff with you. Because most of the time when people get to coaching, they're going to have disordered eating patterns, they're going to have body dysmorphia, they're going to have a low self-esteem, low self-confidence, because this is usually why people reach out for coaching, because they're lost, they're spinning their wheels, they're not confident enough in what they're doing, and they just want that kind of help. And you have to be there to support them, and not offering them a solution too fast, but like letting them find that out for themselves, not putting pressure on them, but just making them have realistic goals and facilitating their achievement of that goal through communication and creating a safe space for them to be able to share. But what I personally do with my clients is just like, hey, I'm human. Sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. I'm always open about it. You can give me feedback on it. And I say the same to my clients. You're going to make mistakes if you binge, if you restrict, if you overdo your cardio because you binged the day before, if you have any kind of struggle, like, you can talk to me. And I've never encountered clients who lie to me or hid things from me, because I make sure during the consultation that they know what I'm about, and they know that this is a safe space for them to share anything they want, as long as they're okay sharing this. Obviously, there are things that are like out of my scope of practice, but most of the time they know that they can share, and they actually do. So I would say just being very straightforward with communication, and telling them, if you struggle with something, you can be vulnerable with me. I'm holding space for you to process that. And it sounds very like hippie yippie, and I get that. It's like when I talk about meditation and journaling or whatever, people are always like, this sounds kind of hippie yippie, this doesn't sound really evidence-based. But if you read some literature on compassion, on changing of behavioral changes, compassion is at the forefront of everything that you can change in terms of behaviors, because it matters so much to do things from like a self-love and compassionate perspective than just hating what you are and who you are. Sorry, that was a very long ramble.
No, that's great.
Did you get an answer out of that?
Yes, most definitely. I think it's something that's becoming more socially acceptable with our generation. I think that kind of like tough love isn't as popular. And I noticed that with a lot of like older coaches, especially in the bodybuilding industry, where it's a lot of tough love coaching. And I just think that, and even with the generation before us, to some degree, that raised a lot of us, that was kind of a lot of the parenting style too. And meeting someone with compassion, I think is huge. I think I've noticed that through experience as well, and having that compassion with yourself as much as with other people, and also having that emotional support system, whether it's through a coach or people around you, is huge for that success, because you can only internalize so much before you kind of lose it. But one thing I did want to ask on that is, do you ever find that it sometimes takes a little bit of time with certain clients? Because I found this myself, is sometimes they do need to build that trust with you before they are transparent about certain things like that. Even if you are, telling them, hey, which I think is really huge, and something I don't do that I would like to do more, is like, hey, like, it's okay. I think people come to me a lot of the time, and they're like, there's this big bodybuilder, and he's like, he's 250 pounds and whatever. And like, he does all these things, I can't screw up. But then they, and I think this is something I want to do more on my social media, is like be more transparent about the struggles I deal with, so that people understand that like I'm human as well. And I deal with a lot of these things myself, but also kind of telling people like, hey, I'm not here to judge you. right? This is a place where I want to help you get better. I think just even saying that is definitely huge. But sorry to go ahead and answer what I was discussing about trust and stuff.
No, you didn't really ask the question. You were leading up to it, and
Oh no, just in regards to um, how do you build that? How do you build that trust, or what do you do
yeah,
in that period of time? Maybe if you haven't built that trust with somebody,
yeah,
do you know, sometimes you can observe that there's maybe something going on. You know,
yeah. You have prep brain, I have COVID brain, so we both got a valid excuse.
right, right,
I think some people will definitely take a little bit longer to come around because they're not comfortable at first. It's really through the way you express yourself with people, the way you talk to them, not on a daily basis, but every check-in. I do video check-ins with my clients, so I get to talk to them each week, and I build that trust over time through being very open about my struggles and trying to be relatable with them, or understanding where they're coming from. If I've never been through what they've been through, I still make a point in holding space and validating what they're going through. I have some people who are terrified of wearing something short sleeve because they think their arms are fat, for example. And I have to acknowledge that it's a valid thing for them, even though I look at them in like video
yeah,
check-ins and from videos and I'm like, they are normal, but they're distorted perception because of a background of eating disorders or anything else like that. It makes it valid for them to have that struggle and those thoughts, and you have to acknowledge and create some kind of space even if you don't understand what they're going through. So
right.
again, we relate back to empathy and compassion and just being very open, and just maybe if people are struggling to opening up yourself first and trying to let them
That's
know like, hey, I've been there and I know what you're going through, or I've never been there but I know people who have been there and I've helped them before, so I know exactly what you're going through even if I haven't experienced it myself. People, one of the primary driver for like just being human in general, we want to be able to communicate and connect with people. If people have that connection aspect on point, if like, hey, like I just want to connect with you, I just want to be humanized, this is what matters. Like people just want to be humans and they just want to be open and they want to be okay with not being perfect. So you have to give them space for that and showing them that, hey, everybody's going through that. Like all of my clients go through that kind of struggle, whatever it is, like body dysmorphia, not being strong enough, or like not being lean enough, whatever it is. All my clients go through that at some point, and even I go through that at some point. So it's just making yourself relatable and relating to people and giving them that empathy and compassion that they're looking for.
yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. I think the video call is really interesting. That's something I always try to do with WhatsApp is like voice messages, the video check-ins, like they get to hear your tone. So like if you're saying like, hey, you know, I noticed this here or whatever, it doesn't sound like you're being accusatory or something like that. Like you're actually asking a question, but sometimes with text it can get lost. And that I think that's really big. And then so making sure that they feel validated. I think I like that example of also like, hey, this is something I've struggled with before, or I know someone else who struggled with this before. So you're not alone in this situation, and maybe this is how I navigated it. But knowing that, hey, I'm here for you in this situation, and we can work through this together, right? I think that's a really big thing for sure. Instead of meeting them with, hey, you screwed up, like you didn't do your weigh-in. Why didn't you do your weigh-in? And that's something I personally like feel I need to work on to some degree. And then always trying not to lead with negative, like, hey, I noticed you did this really great this week, and here's some other things that maybe we can work on for next week, or hey, is there anything I can do to help you meet this other thing that hasn't been being met? Meeting them with empathy, not leading with negative things, I think is really big too. Because if you're always like, hey, you didn't do this, hey, you didn't do this, I think that can also weigh on someone, and then they maybe don't feel as confident in their ability to execute or do things that are laid out for them.
And question yourself, because I have seen recently on social media a lot of coaches saying like, coaches are not babysitters. Coaching are not there to do the work for you. You have to do the work yourself. But no, like all the coaches that say that, they're not actually questioning their processes, which bothers me because I'm like, maybe it's the way you do things that doesn't click with that client and they need something else, which is
Right.
valid. Maybe you're not the right fit for them, but putting all the expectations and the pressure on the clients not working hard enough or not being good enough, or like the whole like we all have 24 hours in a day, which like makes me cringe. It's not valid. It's not a valid excuse for me. Like some people will need a different approach. Like we do this work because we work with people. We want to help people. But some people, I feel like some coaches just want to work with people who are easy to work with and who are absolutely following whatever they say like they need to be following. And this bothers me because this is a service-based experience for people and you're supposed to meet them where they are, not the other way around, because they're actually hiring you to help them figure those things out.
Right.
So it really bothers me when people are like, yeah, coaches aren't babysitters, we're not going to do the work for you. But sometimes you have to put yourself in your client's shoes and understand that, hey, if a mom has 3 kids and she's a single mom and she struggles to do everything at once, like you can't tell them you got to do better because they're already doing the best they can. If they reach out to you, it's because they need freaking help. They don't need for you to tell them they're not doing things the right way or not working hard enough, because that's not the case.
Right.
So that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree. I think it takes a certain amount of reflection. If I ever anybody who ever has any problems or who like I lose a client or something like that, I really try to look within, like, where could I have gone wrong? What could I have done better? I'll go through the messages. I'll make sure that, but it takes a lot of like honesty with yourself and being able to reflect. Obviously there needs to be a point where you don't take the burden of everything, right? But there also needs to be like hey, like, could I have done something better? And I think one thing I noticed that you've done, but I also had been meaning to this and just did it recently, but like kind of asking, like doing maybe a questionnaire or a survey every once in a while, like, hey, how can I help you a little bit better? And then I think as a client too, making sure you communicate things, like if you voice a concern and you aren't met with like empathy or like oh yeah, that's maybe something I could do better or whatever, then maybe that isn't the right fit for you, right? Because if someone like you have something that you're concerned about, maybe that's not a good coach if they can't help you with something along those lines or improve their processes to tailor it to you, meet you where you're at.
The questionnaires, I didn't do the questionnaires through Revive. I actually started doing them in my own business when I launched it in April. And it's been a really good experience. I don't do it every single week, but I do it at the end of every mesocycle. And I ask them like, hey, what's your biggest win this mesocycle? What's your biggest struggle? Do you need help with anything? Like we just do we just reassess. We just reassess how I coach them, how they're being coached, and if there's anything we can do to make this communication, collaboration better. And most of the time we're doing fine, but sometimes they bring up like single, like maybe tiny little details that matter so much in the end. And I'm like, oh, that's such a small detail to change, but it makes such a huge impact.
It could change the sustainability of their program alone with one change, right? And so I wanted to transition. I'll get you out of here soon, but I wanted to transition into that as we're speaking about contest prep. So you did a few competitions recently and did fairly well. You got to I'm not too familiar with the organization, but the level you ended up competing at was pretty high, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
It's the WNBF, so that's the biggest natural federation, and I came third at Worlds. So
which
I
is a big show,
in Europe,
correct?
and it's like the biggest show. It's like the final. It's like the Olympia for natural bodybuilding.
So that's awesome. And I wanted so I mean, we've spoken a little bit about coaching different populations, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how you navigated that. Did you were aware you had ADHD and anxiety while going through this prep, correct?
Oh yeah.
How did you navigate that with those? Because I want to speak on it a little bit as well, as I'm going into a national level show as well, and I have anxiety, and that's something I wanted to touch on. But yeah, how did you navigate that?
It was difficult. It was very difficult. I didn't have everything in place to be as successful as I wanted to be. And looking back, there are many things that I would have liked to do differently.
Right.
But it was a lot about, I was very isolated. I was living with my grandparents. So I didn't go out. I completely cut out my social life for like an entire year. The only thing that kept me grounded was my communication with my coach, which was very helpful. Steve was very helpful. And I had been
Awesome.
working with him for 3 years at that point. So we knew each other
And the
like
relationship, right?
perfectly. Yeah. And the other thing was just really walking and listening to audiobooks. As simple as that sounds, every night I was taking an hour walk, or every morning when I woke up, and I was just listening to an audiobooks and try to shut down the world and just have that 1 hour to myself. I knew that then I could like do whatever I wanted the rest of the day. I had that moment with me, and that was like kind of the thing I was looking forward to. I had meds. I was on SSRI, so I was on Lexapro for almost the entire prep. So that was obviously helpful. I've changed SSRI since then because they weren't strong enough anymore, but that was helpful during prep. And I have impeccable sleep hygiene. My sleep was absolutely banging, which was probably played a huge role in me achieving everything. Now, in terms of business, I had to scale down to doing the bare minimum. So I was just doing the work with the clients that I had. I didn't really advertise. I didn't really market myself. So it was I was very much doing whatever I could. So it was kind of, how prep is like already kind of surviving things. And that was
Yeah.
like surviving things like tenfold.
Right.
So
Right.
it made the experience very rewarding after all, because I'm like,
Right.
hey, I made it this far and I'm
Yeah.
very proud of myself. But looking back, there are so many things I could have done better. You can always, like, if you look back to things, you're
Oh,
like, I could
100%.
have done this better.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it was just a lot of like trial and error, really figuring things out every day and journaling about them and be like, hey, today this didn't work, this did work. Let's focus on what worked and let's try to switch like a few things and the things that didn't work. So it's a lot of refining things, trial and
Yeah.
error, and being compassionate to yourself, acknowledging that you're going to make mistakes and that's okay, because you can't figure everything out if you don't make mistakes. So that was a big part too, just having that
Yeah.
self-awareness.
Yeah. That's huge. I think to kind of work backwards, the mistakes thing, I think, is really big. I think competing at any level, psychological disorders or not, is difficult. It's very difficult. And there are mistakes that are going to be made. And competitors are, man, rarely transparent about the things that they go through, the struggles.
Right.
Like it's very hard to understand that sometimes if you don't have a coach, and you're just looking on social media, you just assume that, like, these guys are just nailing it every day. They're hitting all their sessions. They're not dealing with anything hard. I mean, like, how many bodybuilders are binging before their shows? There's got to be a lot. Like, I can't imagine that there aren't a lot of bodybuilders with these overly restricted diets, doing 2 hours of cardio, that there aren't people binging on their diets, and things like that they're dealing with, but often aren't, because it is very stigmatized. I myself also got medicated with Lexapro before I did this contest prep, knowing, getting that treatment before, knowing that it was a huge limiting factor for myself before, and that was something that would cause me to break and slip up in the past, because my anxiety would get the best of me. I think all those things it's funny how similar it is, where I'm also kind of, I'm a very private person. I tend to be somewhat isolated myself. So I have my girlfriend, my dogs and whatever, but having that time with yourself is really big. I even kind of like have towards the tail end here, kind of told my girlfriend that, like, hey, I'm going to do my walk first, listen to my podcast, then I'll come back in, take the dogs out with you. Having that time, it's literally exactly what I do. I do the hour or 30-minute walk in the morning. I do one at night as well. That really helps me unwind. Having a podcast is so huge. Sleep hygiene, man, that one gets so overlooked by a lot of people, but I have like a very distinct routine every night. It starts at a certain time. The lights get dimmed. I start taking certain supplements. I go for my walk. I take a shower. Like it is so regimented. And especially as you get diet fatigued and training fatigue, that is one that can break people in contest prep is not nailing the sleep, because your hunger cues go up, your hunger hormones go up, your pain tolerance goes down, your fatigue level goes up. I mean, talk about how to make contest prep 10 times harder needlessly, not having a sleep hygiene routine, not getting enough sleep, right there. And then especially if you deal with anxiety, that just makes it 10 times worse. Makes everything way more challenging. Have you had to deal with like setting, this is something that I've learned. I knew it before. I always know it, and I always have to remind myself of it, but having certain boundaries for yourself, like for example, like there's certain rules I can't break. Like I have to go to the gym at a certain time. I have to have certain things that need to be done at certain times. And if I break those rules, that kind of makes things much more challenging. Is that something you've had to deal with at all?
I have ADHD. I live my life like it's a routine. It's a consistent routine.
Yeah.
I have to have that routine, otherwise everything goes to shit. On prep, I do client work first thing in the morning. They are my biggest priority. I want to have the biggest, like the most brain capacity for them, so that's awesome. My priority. So I go for my walk, and then I listen to my client check-ins, and I reply to my client check-ins. I update the programs, and that's non-negotiable. And I can only go to the gym if I've done that. Otherwise, everything that's going to be on my mind when I'm at the gym is my clients. So, and training early in the afternoon, not training at night, because at night I just need to wind down and be comfortable, like just do like my journaling, meditation, have my sleep routine. And if that gets disturbed, it's the same as you, like it doesn't work. So I have a very strict routine as well, where I take my supplements 30 minutes before bed, an hour before bed. I like dim the lights. It's like, it's a whole process too. And if I stick to it, it works wonders. Even deep in prep, when I was on like freaking 1,200 calories and doing like an hour of cardio every day and 12,000 steps, I still stuck to that, and that worked. I was still able to sleep and not being woken up by hunger or fatigue or whatever. So just having a strict routine, it sounds overwhelming at first, but it's really the only way that got me through prep.
Yeah, I mean, there are some people who can get away with it for sure, just genetically and just psychologically, right? Someone who doesn't deal with anxiety or ADHD, who could be very flexible in those situations. And that's definitely a skill that you need to have, is to be able to be flexible. Stuff's going to come up. But that being said, I still think ultimately it is smart to have some sort of routine that you follow, even if you have some variance in that, or you're someone who can handle a certain level of variance. It does, like you said, it's overwhelming at first, but it's also, it's habitual. So it's not something you think about. Like you get up and you do these things, and it's almost autopilot, right? So I think like can't remember what it is, and you've studied psychology, but is it like stacking, where you have a certain behavior, you have a certain behavior that you do, and then you add a behavior onto that, right? And that's how I built those two, the morning and night routines, especially really easy to do, because hey, like I get up, I have my coffee, go for a walk, take my dogs out, I go to the gym. And then that's like, hey, my morning routine, that's my stacked routine, right? I built onto that, right? And then same with nighttime, like, oh, I know I need to do this thing. Okay, well, let's add it on to the thing I already do. Hey, after I'm done eating my meal, I'll brush my teeth and then do this. That helped me in building those, especially at the start of prep. And then you just ride that out the whole way.
And doing small steps. Don't take too big of a step, because this is gonna like bite you in the ass at the end. Like right. You need to like lower the expectations on what you can achieve, especially on prep, because you're already an under-functioning human. Scaling your expectations for yourself with where you're at. That's something that I've struggled with for sure, with business and whatnot. And social media too. Like I'm in the same place as you, where I've had to scale back and only, work with the clients I have. Like I have a restaurant job I work sometimes. I can't even
I don't have the functionality to do it right now. And I know I'm taking a hit doing that, but I also understand that I have a certain capacity. So there's only so much you can do. And then having your priorities in check, right? Structuring your day in a way your priorities are met with, for you, your clients, knowing that the things that you want to get done and are non-negotiable as well, and making sure those get done first. That's something that I've done. One other thing, I'm sure you do this, but I've been harsh on myself in the past, but like having just time for yourself.
You have to. You have to. If you don't, you will lose your mind. Like you
Yeah.
have to have downtime. You have to have your like alone time, and that's why I go on my walks by myself.
Walks, yeah.
I just moved here with my partner, upstate New York. We live in like a small-ish apartment, like a small-ish. It's not a studio, like it's a one bed, one bath, but like we both are online coaches, so we literally work at home all day. We see each other all day. We go to the gym together. We drive together.
Yeah.
At some point during the day, he goes on a walk by himself. I go on a walk by myself, and each other has like downtime, alone time, and we need that space. And when you're in contest prep, your tolerance for people lowers as you go, like as you get deeper in contest prep. Like you just need more time by yourself, and it's also harder to be in social situations because you're hungry, you're irritated. Like it gets hard, and you have to remove yourself from the situations, and it's not a bad thing. You're just prioritizing what you want to achieve right now, and it's okay to prioritize yourself.
It'll be there, and remember that it'll be there. Don't needlessly do it. Like I think like there comes a point, like some people will start at like 12 weeks out, stop social situations. Like no, I was able to still go out and have some food with friends, or my girlfriend go out to dinner at that time, but then you kind of you can kind of reassess every week, like, hey, where's my hunger at? Where's my tolerance for other individuals? And you kind of have to scale that back instead of it happening for you. Like it's like a good analogy in training is like taking a deload almost preemptively, or at least having some idea of when you're going to deload. It was also like, hey, like when do I need to pull back and reevaluate or kind of take a step back from other obligations, so I can prioritize this thing, for a period of time, right?
And if you don't do it, your body will tell you to.
Exactly, because same as in training, right? If you don't do it, like for me, and I'm sure with you, with someone who has like an anxiety disorder, you'll be met with anxiety, and that in a prep environment for me is what can cause issues, right? Is like you don't have a lot of food, you don't have a lot of energy, and then trying to manage anxiety with that is a really difficult challenge, I've found.
It will make you very resilient.
Yeah, amongst a lot of other things. One other thing before I get you out of here, female contest prep recovery. I'm starting to educate myself more on this, but I wanted you to touch on it. Because as competitors in general, we generally will get to a certain level of leanness, and it's hard to get let go of that, right? It's like, hey, I achieved this look. Like for myself, this is the leanest I've ever gotten. I know I'm not going to want to let go of it because it's such a big accomplishment for me. Mm-hmm. But I know in order to recover, I need to, and that's from what I understand, especially important for females. Is recovery of, especially if you're a natural athlete, well, I guess in enhanced too from a health perspective, but recovery of menstrual cycle and normal hormonal function for men and women. But could you touch on that? Has that been something you've struggled with in the past? What did you do after this show in order to do that? Just touch on that if you can.
It's my favorite topic ever show for females and for males, but yes.
Yeah.
I do not like the reverse diet. Reverse diet when you're coming out of a show is completely inappropriate, in my opinion.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt. A reverse diet, could you define that versus
recovery diet? So my approach is recovery diet versus a reverse diet. Reverse diet is pretty much increasing your calories through time, kind of slowly enough so you can remain somewhat lean and build up your calories. So the goal is to stay lean and eat more. The problem with the reverse diet, if you're being competing, if you've lost your menstrual cycle, if your hormones are out of whack, and if you've been competing, your hormones are out of whack. The problem is that you will probably stay in a deficit for a long time before you actually reach maintenance, or you will be at maintenance, but you will still be under eating and you won't be recovering. Your hormones won't be recovering. You need to gain body fat. And there is a very overwhelming amount of evidence that suggests that you need to increase your body fat post-show almost as fast as possible to actually get back to like normal functions hormonally. And that's why I prefer the recovery diet, because the recovery diet allows you to just eat more right after the show, gain body fat back, and just becoming a more functional human physiologically and psychologically like a month after the show, which is massively important for literally every function of your body. So what I personally did, so my prep last year was almost a year. I started prepping January 3rd.
Wow.
And I stepped on stage at Worlds November 20th.
Yeah.
This entire time, I had very little diet breaks, very little refeeds, a few days at maintenance. Most of that was in a deficit. And unfortunately, I have a very adaptable metabolism, meaning that I diet. I am 5'7", and I started prep at 150 pounds. I ended up my diet for the past months of prep at 1,250 calories for a very long time.
What was your starting caloric amount?
1,700, I think, 1,700. Okay. So across the year, I lost about 500 calories, and I started with no cardio, and I ended up doing cardio every single day of the week for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
On top of 12 to 15,000 Ks, depending on how we were in the year. So that is a cockroach metabolism.
Yeah, I got one. I got one too. I'm with you there.
We will survive an apocalypse, so that's the good thing. That's how I see myself. I'm like, okay, there's got to be
the one advantage, right?
Yeah. But I lost my period almost instantly. I think a couple of months into prep, I lost my period. My menstrual cycle was completely inexistent. I had no ovulation, no bleed, nothing. Nothing was happening. No sex drive, just everything that comes with it. High hunger, low satiety, all the good stuff. I had my period back in April this year. So I went a year and a month without any sign of my menstrual cycle. And this is not a rare thing. This is very common between females. And as much as people don't want to talk about it, or they see it as like they wear it as a badge of honor, like I got so lean that I lost my period. It's not. It's not healthy. It's not a badge of honor. You shouldn't be proud of it. It just happens with prep as a byproduct of everything that's happening physiologically. So it took me about 7 months, and November to April, 5 months. It took me 5 months to get my period back. And I did that by limiting my exercise. So I went from 6 days a week to 4 days a week, limiting my step count. So I lowered my step count pretty drastically. I completely stopped doing cardio, and I ate to satiety. That meant in about 5 months, I gained 25 pounds back from stage weight. So it sounds like a lot for a female, especially for a natural female, but this is what I had to do to get my period back. And if you lose your period, if you lose your menstrual cycle, you can have irreversible bone density loss, meaning that even if you're 20, 25, 30, you could actually lose bone density forever and it will never come back. So that is probably the main thing that's to mention. And then obviously, if you don't have your period, you are losing a lot of functions that are supposed to happen within your body that you do not want to lose as a female. So you need to be ovulating, you need to be bleeding. Recovering your period as fast as you can is the major concern for females post-show. If you lost it, if you haven't lost it, you got lucky. Some people actually keep their period into the show. It doesn't mean that you should stop like reversing out of a show. You should still eat up, and you should still try to get your hormones back on track, because even if you still have your menstrual cycle, your hormones, I guarantee, are fucking wacky.
Right, most definitely, because the deficit and the activity and whatnot, low energy availability state will suppress your sex hormones, which
Exactly.
for building muscle, for just basic function, all that stuff, it definitely can get in the way.
It's everything.
Uh,
It affects like cognitive function, your sexual
yeah,
function, like literally everything you want to do is going to be worse if you are
right.
in a low energy
Yeah,
availability
yeah,
state.
and it's important to prioritize. You've done it, right, especially if you've done a show. It's like you've achieved that thing. Now let's prioritize being a normal human. I mean, I love bodybuilding, but I want nothing more after I get off stage than to be able to go out to eat with my girlfriend and be a normal human and not be food focused. And the only way to do that is to bring your calories into probably a slight surplus, not even just maintenance, and maybe even a
Oh yeah.
slight surplus, gain some body fat back, and and get back to normal physiological function. Like there's other things in life, especially in your case, like a whole year. I couldn't even imagine. That's so rough. It's like I'm sure that like it's you don't want to continue to have those same like the food focus and that psychological
I know.
and it's potentially disordered if you're like trying to hold on to lean physique, right? It's like, what are you accomplishing? Like obviously you look great, but like at the cost of all of these other problems, right? And especially when you're talking about long-term bone mineral density loss, especially if you're thinking really long-term, like what's one of the number one causes of mortality and loss of independence in old age is falling. And if you
Yeah.
got a fracture, a hip fracture, or something like that, you're done. So it's huge, especially if you're thinking long term, long term.
And if you stay at maintenance calories after a show, you will still be in an energy available, like in a low energy
Right, right.
availability state. You have
Yeah,
to be in a surplus.
yeah,
And
yeah,
once you've had stomach veins, you do not want to gain weight because those will be covered instantly. But it's stomach veins are good for the stage. That's it. That's the
yeah,
only
100%.
function they have.
And you can still look good. Like you don't have to like, you can get into a slight surplus, gain some weight back, get your function back, and then you could go to maintenance. And you could do a nice gradual massing phase, and you can still look great throughout that. You don't have to like, you just have to understand that like, hey, what this, you know, this stage and that time around stage, that look is not sustainable. And I know with maybe a less experienced competitor too, they could think that like that's something that's sustainable because you see people on the internet all the time that's what they look like, and you think they look like that all the time. And if they do, they're making either large health trade-offs in taking certain drugs year round, or or they are experiencing all of those adaptations, all those negative consequences, and their life's probably a mess outside of that. So again, the
They're
transparency or lack of is huge there.
they're probably miserable people. And I
Yeah,
always say to my clients
100%.
that compare themselves, IG is a highlight reel. You do not know what people are actually going
Yeah,
through. And most of the time, those people are either heavily drugged and kind of miserable anyway because they're trying to sustain a body that's too lean for them to be functioning normally on, or they have genetic elite, like elite
yeah, and there's
genetics,
the genetic component too, right?
and there's nothing like you're not going to change your genetics, so don't compare yourself to those people anyway because that's something that's out of your control.
Yeah, 100%. And worrying about what you do have control over, and for not worrying about what you don't.
Oh yeah.
All right, Jess. Well, I'm gonna let you get out of here. Thank you for staying on for so long. This is a really great
Of
talk.
course.
I can't tell you how much I respect your approach to coaching, and it's awesome to see. I would say we have similar value systems to some degree, and it's awesome to see other people leading in coaching like that. And I hope that it becomes the rule, not the exception, in especially in bodybuilding coaching and in just general online coaching. But I think it's really cool to see other people doing it, and I think the best we can do is continue to communicate and continue to lift each other up. And that's kind of why I want to do this podcast and stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. And I do think, if I can say one last thing before I lose my voice, the whole aspect of like collaborating with people and other coaches instead of like bashing each other is fantastic. And this should be the
Yeah,
approach.
100%. Well, in anything, like, I mean, I was backstage at my bodybuilding show, and I was just trying to make friends and talk to people, because like you think about like bodybuilding in general, in this physique sport, it's so odd, it's so obscure. There's, it's such a weird thing for a lot of people. It's like we need more people to support each other. I mean, in general too.
Yeah.
So I think it's really big. But yeah, again, collaborating, communicating, and then also knowing that you're not alone, being able to reach out to other people. Like
Oh
even
yeah.
you've reached out to me during this prep, which has been huge. And that's a really, really big thing. Is just like being able to do that. But yeah, so I mean, obviously you've shown that by example, just in your general interaction outside of your coaching too. So it's great that you do that. So where can people find you as far as coaching and social media and stuff?
Everything's on Instagram. I don't have much activity anywhere else. So Jess Dalglish on Instagram. That's the only way
Awesome.
to find me. That's accessible.
Yeah, you have your coaching link in your bio as well, or your application and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I highly recommend you guys follow Jess. Just from her transparency. Her book recommendations have been amazing. I literally just saved one on Audible while we were talking. So I can't. I've definitely got a lot of good books from you over the time of following you. So, and then just lots of great posts about psychology and coaching and stuff like that. I learn a ton, and I think anytime you have someone who provides value like that, you should always follow them. So I'll put your links down below, Jess.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for coming on.